For 40 years, banks controlled the silver market. They set the price, they managed supply, they determined when silver went up and when it went down, not through free markets, through manipulation, spoofing, naked shorting, fractional reserves. They built a system where paper contracts outnumbered physical metal by 100 to 1, where they could print infinite supply on the COMEX while actual silver sat in vaults they controlled. It was perfect, total control. Until now, something broke in December 2024. The mechanism that allowed banks to suppress silver prices stopped working. Physical premiums exploded. Delivery delays stretched to months. Mints ran out of inventory. And most terrifying for the banks, industrial buyers started bypassing the COMEX entirely and negotiating directly with miners. The paper market is being abandoned. And when a paper market built on leverage and fake supply gets abandoned, it doesn't slowly decline, it collapses violently. The banks are losing control, and they're panicking. If you want to understand why the silver market is entering a crisis that will make 2008 look calm, why banks are desperately trying to contain a situation that's already out of their control, and what happens when the most manipulated commodity market in history finally breaks, hit that subscribe button. Because what's happening right now has never happened before. The largest short squeeze in commodity market history is beginning, and the banks are on the wrong side. Let's go. Let's start with what just happened. On December 3rd, 2024, the premium on physical silver coins hit 12% above spot price. That means if the COMEX said silver was worth $58, dealers were charging $65 for actual coins. This might not sound dramatic until you understand what it means. The premium is the gap between paper price and physical price. In a healthy market, the premium is 1 to 2%. It covers minting costs and dealer margins. When the premium hits 10% or more, it means one thing: there isn't enough physical silver to meet demand. But it gets worse. The U.S. Mint, which produces American Silver Eagles, the most popular silver coin in the world, announced they're rationing supply to dealers. They can't keep up with demand. Dealers are getting allocations. If you order 100 coins, you might get 20, and you'll wait weeks. The Royal Canadian Mint is back-ordered through February 2025. The Perth Mint in Australia is quoting 12-week delivery times. These are government mints. They have unlimited resources, and they can't produce enough silver to meet demand. Now you might think, okay, there's high retail demand. People are buying coins. So what? Here's why it matters. Retail demand for silver coins is tiny compared to industrial demand. Coins and bars represent maybe 10% of annual silver consumption. The other 90% is industrial. Solar panels, electronics, batteries, medical devices. And industrial buyers don't buy from mints. They buy from refiners. They buy 1,000-ounce bars. And refiners are running out too. In November 2024, a major solar panel manufacturer in China tried to secure 300 metric tons of silver for their 2025 production. That's about 10 million ounces. They went to their usual suppliers. The suppliers quoted them a 20-week delivery time. 20 weeks. For an industrial buyer who needs steady supply, this is unprecedented. The supplier told them that physical silver is tight. Everyone is demanding delivery. Nobody wants to hold paper contracts anymore. They want the metal. And there isn't enough metal. So the solar company did something that should terrify the banks. They went directly to a silver mining company in Peru and negotiated a supply contract that bypasses the COMEX entirely. They're buying silver at the mine gate, paying above COMEX prices, locking in multi-year supply. This is how commodity markets die. When the largest buyers stop using the exchange and go direct to producers, the exchange becomes irrelevant, and if the COMEX becomes irrelevant, the banks lose their ability to set prices. They lose control. And this isn't isolated. Multiple industrial buyers are doing the same thing. Battery manufacturers, electronics companies, medical device makers. They're all negotiating direct supply deals. They're offering premiums above COMEX prices. They're locking in long-term contracts because they've realized that the COMEX price is fake. It's a number on a screen that doesn't reflect physical availability. And if you need actual silver to run your factory, you can't rely on paper contracts. You need metal, and metal is scarce. Now, let's talk about why this is happening. For decades, the silver market operated on a fractional reserve system. The COMEX had, let's say, 100 million ounces of physical silver in its vaults. But there were futures contracts representing 5 billion ounces. That's a 50 to 1 ratio. For every ounce of real silver, there were 50 paper claims. This worked because most contract holders never took delivery. They just rolled their contracts or settled in cash. The silver never actually moved. It was a paper trading game. But something changed. Starting in 2022, more and more contract holders started demanding physical delivery. At first, it was small. A few large investors, some hedge funds. The COMEX could handle it. They deliver silver from their vaults, restock from miners, keep the system running. But the delivery amount of silver leaving COMEX vaults hit record levels, and it wasn't being restocked because mining production is flat, and what little new supply exists is already committed to industrial buyers. Here's the key number. COMEX registered silver, which is silver available for immediate delivery, dropped from 200 million ounces in 2020 to 117,000 ounces in December 2024. Read that again, 117,000 ounces. That's the amount of silver actually available for delivery at the COMEX. But there are futures contracts representing over 600 million ounces. That's a ratio of 5,000 to 1. For every ounce of deliverable silver, there are 5,000 paper claims. This is the fractional reserve system collapsing, and the banks know it. In October 2024, JP Morgan, the largest player in the silver market, quietly increased the margins required to hold silver futures positions. They made it more expensive to demand delivery. This is a defensive move. They're trying to discourage people from taking physical metal, because if even 1% of contract holders demand delivery, the COMEX runs out of silver. And if the COMEX runs out, the price doesn't just go up, it goes vertical. We're talking about a gap from $60 to $200 in a single trading session, because there's no metal to deliver, but the margin increases aren't working. Delivery requests are still climbing. Why? Because industrial buyers have figured out that the COMEX is running dry. And if you're a solar panel manufacturer who needs silver to keep your factory running, you can't take the risk that the COMEX defaults on delivery. You need to secure metal now, even if it means paying a premium, even if it means bypassing the exchange entirely. This is rational behavior, but it's accelerating the death spiral. Let me show you what happens when a commodity exchange runs out of physical inventory. In 2020, the oil futures market had a similar crisis. The WTI crude oil contract went negative, minus $37 per barrel. How does a barrel of oil have negative value? Because the futures contract required physical delivery in Cushing, Oklahoma. And Cushing's storage tanks were full. There was nowhere to put the oil. Contract holders were desperate to avoid taking delivery. So they paid people to take the contracts off their hands. The price went negative. Silver is the inverse situation. Instead of too much supply and nowhere to store it, there's too much demand and not enough metal to deliver. When that breaks, the price doesn't go negative, it goes infinite. Because if you hold a contract that says you're owed 1,000 ounces of silver, and the COMEX doesn't have 1,000 ounces to give you, what happens? They default. They offer you cash settlement. But you don't want cash, you want silver. So you go to the physical market, and you find out that physical silver is trading at $80, or $100, or whatever price clears the market. The COMEX price becomes meaningless. This is why the banks are panicking. They're short. Not all of them, but enough of them. When you're short silver, you're betting the price goes down. You've sold contracts promising to deliver silver you don't have. You're hoping to buy it back cheaper later. But if the price spikes and you're forced to deliver, you have to go into the physical market and buy at whatever price exists. If physical silver is trading at $150 because of a supply shortage and you're short at $60, you're losing $90 per ounce. On a million ounce position, that's $90 million in losses. And some banks are short hundreds of millions of ounces. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank for central banks, released a report in November 2024 that should have made headlines but didn't. They estimated that global banks have short positions in precious metals totaling over $300 billion. That's their exposure if gold and silver prices spike. $300 billion. For context, Lehman Brothers collapsed with about $600 billion in liabilities. If the silver short squeeze forces banks to cover positions at massively higher prices, we're looking at bank failures. Not small banks, major international institutions. And the banks can't just cover their shorts by buying on the COMEX, because the COMEX doesn't have the metal. They'd have to go to the physical market. But the physical market is already tight. If banks try to buy hundreds of millions of ounces of physical silver, the price would explode. They'd be buying into a squeeze they created. This is a trap. And they built it themselves by shorting a market where physical supply is genuinely constrained. Now, you might ask, why did they short silver in the first place if supply is so tight? Because they thought they could control it forever. For 40 years, anytime silver started to rise, they'd dump massive short positions on the COMEX, flood the market with paper supply. Push the price back down. It worked every time. In 1980, silver hit $50. The COMEX changed the rules, implemented position limits, and crashed the price. In 2011, silver hit $49. They raised margins 5 times in 8 days, crashed it again. The playbook worked. They had total control. But this time is different, because the physical shortage is real. In 1980, there was plenty of physical silver. The Hunt brothers were just trying to corner the market through futures. The COMEX could break them by changing rules. In 2011, the rally was driven by investment demand, people buying ETFs and coins. evaporated. But in 2024, the shortage is driven by industrial demand, solar panel production, EV manufacturing, 5G build-out. These buyers can't just stop needing silver because the price went up. They need it to operate. And that demand is inelastic. This is why the banks are losing control. They can manipulate paper prices, they can raise margins, they can change COMEX rules, but they can't create physical silver that doesn't exist. Mining production is 25,000 metric tons per year. That number has been flat for a decade. Industrial demand is 32,000 metric tons per year. That's a 7,000 ton deficit every year for 3 years running. The deficit is being filled by above ground stockpiles. But stockpiles are finite, and they're depleting. India was the last major source of above ground supply. Indian families have held silver for generations. When prices rise, they sell. This kept a lid on prices for decades. But in 2024, India flipped from a net seller to a net buyer. For the first time in modern history, Indian demand exceeded Indian supply. The release valve is gone. There's no buffer left. When the next price spike comes, there's nothing to cap it. No secret supply to dump on the market, no strategic reserve to stabilize prices. Just pure supply and demand. And supply can't meet demand. So what happens next? Let me walk you through the most likely scenario. It's early 2025. Silver is trading at $65. Physical premiums are 15%. Delivery times are stretching to 6 months. Then a major bank, let's say Deutsche Bank, announces they're having difficulty meeting delivery obligations on silver futures contracts. They offer cash settlement instead. The market panics. Everyone who's holding paper contracts realizes that if one bank can't deliver, others probably can't either. There's a rush to take delivery. Convert paper to physical. The COMEX sees delivery requests for 50 million ounces in a single week. They only have 117,000 ounces available. They can't deliver. They suspend trading. Or they implement force majeure. Basically, they declare an emergency and void contracts. This has never happened in modern COMEX history, but it's in the rulebook. They can do it. When they do, silver gaps up. Not 10%, not 20%. It gaps to $150 overnight because the paper market just died. And the only price that matters is the physical price. Industrial buyers who need silver to keep factories running panic. They're willing to pay anything, $200, $300, whatever it takes, because if they don't get silver, their production lines shut down. Solar panel companies, electronics manufacturers, medical device makers, they all start bidding against each other. The price goes vertical, and the banks that are short can't cover because there's no physical metal available at any price. This triggers margin calls. Banks that are short silver have to post more collateral, but silver keeps rising. The losses get bigger. Some banks can't meet the margin calls. They default. Counterparties panic. Credit default swaps on bank debt spike. We're now in a full-blown financial crisis, not because of mortgages or derivatives, because of silver, a metal most people don't even think about. Governments step in. The Federal Reserve opens emergency lending facilities. The COMEX gets bailed out. They retroactively change the rules. Force cash settlement on all contracts. Declare silver a strategic commodity and implement price controls. They'll do whatever it takes to contain the crisis. But here's the problem. You can control paper markets. You can't control physical markets. If solar panel manufacturers in China are willing to pay $300 for physical silver because they need it to operate, no amount of price controls in New York will stop that trade. The global silver market fragments. There's the official COMEX price, which is maybe $100 and frozen by government intervention. And there's the real price, which is whatever physical silver trades for in private deals. $300, $400, $500. The two-tier system persists for months, maybe years, until either new mining supply comes online, which takes a decade, or industrial demand gets destroyed by a recession. This is the end game, and it's not science fiction. Every piece is already in place. The physical shortage is real. The COMEX inventories are depleted. Industrial demand is inelastic. Banks are short. The fractional reserve system is breaking. The only question is timing. Does this happen in March 2025, June 2025, December 2025? Nobody knows. But the setup is complete. The banks have lost control. They just don't know it yet. Here's how you know they're panicking. In November 2024, JP Morgan published a research note saying silver was overvalued and due for a correction. The same bank that accumulated 1 billion ounces of physical silver is now telling clients to sell. Why would they do that? Because they need to slow down the buying pressure. They need people to stay away from silver while they figure out how to exit their short positions without triggering the squeeze. It's desperation. And it's not working. Retail investors are ignoring the bank research. They're buying coins at record premiums. They don't care that JP Morgan says silver is overvalued. They've seen this playbook before. Banks said Bitcoin was worthless at $3,000. Now they're offering Bitcoin ETFs. Banks said gold was a barbarous relic in the 1990s. Then they started buying. The credibility is gone. Nobody believes the banks anymore. And that loss of credibility is accelerating the panic. Because if retail doesn't trust bank research, and industrial buyers are bypassing the COMEX, and physical premiums keep widening, the banks have no tools left. They can't talk the price down. They can't flood the market with paper supply because nobody wants paper anymore. They can't deliver physical because they don't have enough. They're out of moves. The control is gone. And the most terrifying part for them is that this is going to be studied in business schools for the next 50 years. The largest banks in the world manipulated a commodity market for 4 decades. They were convicted. They paid fines. They kept manipulating. And then they got caught in their own trap. They shorted a market where supply genuinely couldn't meet demand. They thought they could control it forever. They were wrong. And now they're going to lose billions, maybe hundreds of billions. Some might not survive. The banks just lost control of silver. The panic is spreading. There's no way to put the genie back in the bottle.